Interpretive delegated legislation. It refers to a type of delegated legislation in which the executive is authorized to interpret, explain, and elaborate certain provisions of an act passed by Parliament or a state legislature. Legislation may contain numerous technical terms, specialized expressions, or provisions whose meaning may not be sufficiently clear to ordinary citizens. In such circumstances, the legislature may authorize the executive to make appropriate rules and regulations to clarify and explain the provisions of the Act. Need for interpretive delegated legislation. Modern legislation often deals with specialized subjects and therefore contains technical words and expressions. The general meaning of these terms may sometimes be difficult for ordinary people to understand. While the Act itself does not adequately explain such terms, delegated legislation can provide the necessary clarification. Removal of ambiguity. Sometimes the language of an act may create doubt, uncertainty, ambiguity regarding the practical application of its provisions. The executive may therefore be authorized to frame rules or regulations explaining how particular provisions are to be understood and implemented. Role of executive. The executive authorities may formulate rules and regulations to clarify the meaning and practical application of provisions contained in the parent act. These rules help administrative authorities and citizens understand how the statutory provisions are intended to operate. Practical guidance. Interpretive delegated legislation provides practical guidance to people regarding the requirements of the law. It helps citizens understand their rights, duties, and obligations under the legislation. However, the executive cannot use interpretive rules to alter, contradict, or enlarge the essential provisions of the parent act. Its function is primarily to clarify and facilitate implementation within the limits of the authority delegated by the legislature. Importance of interpretive delegated legislation. Easy understanding of law. It makes complex legislation easier to understand by explaining technical terms and clarifying provisions. Effective administration. Clear rules enable administrative authorities to apply the law more uniformly and effectively. Guidance to citizens. Citizens can better understand the requirements of legislation and regulate their conduct accordingly. Conclusion. Interpretive delegated legislation is a useful form of delegated legislation through which the executive clarifies and elaborates the provisions of an act within the authority granted by the legislature. It is particularly useful where legislation contains technical terminology or provisions requiring further clarification. Its main purpose is to remove uncertainty, facilitate implementation, and make the law easier to understand and apply while remaining within the limits of the parent legislation.